Take a closer look now at the areas in Syria that are controlled by the Kurds. They control most of northern Syria along the border with Turkey, where they've declared an autonomous region. The Kurdish fighting group known as the People's Protection Units, or YPG, received support from the U.S. to fight ISIL. The YPG were involved in forcing ISIL out of Manbij last week. ISIL had controlled the city for more than 2 years. Kurdish fighters say heavy bombardments by Syrian forces in Hasakah have killed dozens of civilians. Joining me now from Toronto via Skype is Nader Hashemi, director at the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver and author of the Syria Dilemma. And thank you so much for your time. So why do you think that the government was carrying out these airstrikes, in Hasakah, which they haven't in the entire 5 years of the civil war?
Well, the city of Hasakah is sort of jointly controlled by Kurdish militias and by the Syrian government. And so there have been clashes recently. And I suspect that the Syrian government felt that they were losing control of their part of the city and thus retaliated via these airstrikes.
So what could the ripple effect from this be, the fact that the U.S. was so engaged here as well? It was really a kind of a close call.
Well, I don't think we need to overstate the level of U.S. involvement. They were simply scrambling their aircraft in the area to protect the approximately 300 U.S. Special Forces that are backing the Kurdish YPG. And so I think this is a very limited intervention by the United States, and I don't think we should read this as any sort of attempt to get involved in the conflict in Syria, where the Obama administration has been very clear that it does not want to get involved, and it only wants to deal with the question of ISIS in Syria.
So the focus really is largely still Aleppo at this point?
I think that's where the major story is. I mean, there's a major humanitarian and human rights catastrophe unfolding as we speak, embodied in that horrific image of that 5-year-old boy, Umran, that really shocked the world over the last 24 hours. Stepped up napalm attacks on Syrian rebel-held areas by the Assad regime and/or by Russia. And I think the bigger story here really is the question of what can the Assad regime, backed by Russia and Iran, accomplish in terms of changing the military conditions on the ground before Hillary Clinton comes into office and has pledged to get involved in the Syrian conflict in a much more robust way that clashes and contrasts with the Obama administration approach to this conflict.
So what might their calculations be in that regard, and how much more complicated is it now that Iran seems to be so much more involved, at least by proxy?
Whose calculations are you referring to?
The calculations of the Assad regime and Russia as a whole.
I think they're trying to take advantage. The clock is not on their side. I think they're taking Hillary Clinton's statements on Syria very seriously, and so there's a few months left before she comes into office. And they want to, Russia, Iran, and Assad want to, I think, capture the city of Aleppo, which would be a huge symbolic but also strategic victory for the Assad regime against the rebel forces. They hope that would, perhaps defeat forever the rebel movement that's fighting the Assad regime. And so that's why we're seeing this stepped up, I think, series of attacks by Russia and Assad. We've also heard in the last 48 hours reports of Russia using Iranian air bases to send its long-range bombing aircraft to Syria. This is all, I think, anticipation of an intensification of this war in the next few months before the U.S. presidential election.
Okay, Nader Hashemi, thank you very much for your insight. We appreciate it.